Hey, it's Shane. Welcome to episode 253 of Shane Plays Geek Talk. Thanks so much for listening. Today's guest is Paul Kupperberg, who has written over 1,400 comic books over 4 decades. He's done a lot, including reboots of the Doom Patrol. Of course, he's written for Peacemaker and Vigilante, which I thought it'd be timely to talk with him, given that they're getting higher profile because of the HBO Max TV series. He's also the writer who killed Archie and married him off to Betty and Veronica in the comic books, in the Life of Archie comic books. And how did he marry him off to both Betty and Veronica? Well, tune in if you don't already know, and you'll find out. We also talk about the fact that in the real world, superheroes will be just nuts. There's the willing suspension of disbelief versus the art style in comic books. What does Archie mean to Paul? And I was surprised to find that Archie's very meaningful to Paul. Target audiences for comic books over different eras. Does Paul prefer the JSA or the JLA? Armchair quarterbacking by comics fans. The challenges of continuity in serialized fiction over time. With one example, we talk about Wonder Woman, Wonder Girl, and Wonder Tot, which is kind of a famous trying to fix continuity things that has come up in comic books. Which classic Silver Age DC Comics issues didn't have a number on the cover, and why? One positive early benefit of the direct market in the comics industry. I like to call that out because I'm often not exactly down on the direct market, but I would love to see comics get back into like convenience stores, and I talk about that a lot on the show. What was the first comics miniseries? Why was it a last minute thing? What did director James Gunn, think of Paul's version of Peacemaker? Which comics character has Paul had the strongest fan feedback to? What does he consider his strongest sustained comic work? And what's the one comics character he would love to return to? We talk about this and a whole lot more. It was wonderful talking to Paul. I appreciate his time. Again, thank you for listening. And with no further ado, let's get on with the show.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate having you. This is Shane Plays. I do talk about games. This is not just a show about games. It's when I play. It's when I geek out. It's when I have fun, which can include games, comic books, which today we'll be talking a lot about comic books. Have a tremendous guest on. I'm still kind of surprised at this caliber of guest with as easy as it came together. So many thanks for my guest for just being very pleasant to schedule with, who I will introduce here in a moment. It's just when I play. It's when I have fun and get geeky. So that's where the Shane Plays comes from, and it's Geek Talk. So with no further ado, as listeners will know, one of my main passions is comic books. Love comic books. Never get tired of talking about them. It's one of the joys of my life. And we have a guest today who has written, I think, 72.6% of all comic books ever, or something like that. And it is the Paul Kupperberg. Paul, welcome to Shane Plays.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Shane.
So glad to have you. I want to thank our mutual friend Bill Burkeen, for making the introduction. So I'm sure most people listening to this will know your name if they read comic books at all, and some of what you do. But let me let people know a little bit more that they may not realize. Paul, you've been writing comic books, and not just mainstream comic books, but what I would call heavily into DC Marvel type comic books, mainstream comic books, for over 4 decades. Some of the things you've worked on are Doom Patrol. Now, it wasn't the original Niles Calder and did all that, but you reinvigorated and did my favorite era of Doom Patrol, which was in the 80s. And I didn't have a lot of familiarity. Most of my knowledge with the original Doom Patrol came later. Mm-hmm. So your Doom Patrol is my Doom Patrol, even though I love all the other stuff. And I read it, and I've got the collected Silver Age stuff and everything. Now, there's a couple of heroes or anti-heroes, however you want to look at them, that are probably on a lot of people's lips right now that you're involved with. Of course, there's the Peacemaker series on HBO Max that includes a version of Vigilante. And you've worked on both characters in the comics. And of course, you know, the James Gunn Suicide Squad had featured Peacemaker heavily as well. Now, Wikipedia, Paul, says that you've got 1,000 comic book writing credits, but I was doing some research and there's an article out there called Paul Kupperberg, My 13 Favorite Comic Book Stories I've Ever Written. And that'll be linked in the show notes at shaneplays.com. So go check out shaneplays.com, find the show notes for this episode. And you said you've written 1,400 comics.
Yeah, approximately. The 1,000 number in Wikipedia is from several years ago. But yeah, approximately. Between, and I'm counting everything in comic books, you know, from
Right.
a one production for House of Mystery to, a show.
Yeah, I think people forget, and I'm starting to see it a little bit more. DC Comics is doing it more often these days, where you get the main title and then there'll be like a backup story.
Right.
And that used to be very common in comics.
Plus, on top of that, we also had all these anthology titles. Those House of Mystery, Secrets, Ghosts, Weird War Tales, all these places for when I came into the business in 1975. So it was this place for new writers to, fail and learn how to do it.
Well, yeah, you could test out new talent and you could also test out characters or teams to see if people would,
Even that advanced. We were just happy to do a Weird War Tale about, whatever war you happen to have a story for. Whatever ghost story you could stick a helmet on. But it was just a chance, it was just opportunities to learn how it's done. It's difficult to write a 6-part epic, a comic book epic, but it's way tougher to write a 6-page comic book story. In that House of Mystery, all these Weird War Tales, it was all about these short, Twilight Zone kind of stories. But, when you're writing a 6-pager in an anthology like that, you're starting from scratch. You don't have Clark Kent and Lois Lane and the familiarity of the Daily Planet and all that. So you're not only telling this story and introducing all these elements, you've also got to introduce all the characters. So, it's a very tight, compact way of storytelling, and you learn a lot, right?
I imagine. Yeah, I remember I used to love reading those old horror anthologies or the war anthologies. Especially the horror ones or the sci-fi ones would always end on a twist, usually a shocking twist, like Twilight Zone.
Over from the old code when you weren't allowed to do horror.
Right.
They had some weird little twist to justify it.
And you wrote a lot during the code days, what would be considered the code days, and especially in the days when the code was really being enforced, because I can't remember I think it was in the 90s or 2000s. I remember reading about it where Marvel was like, well, just run it without the code. And like nobody even really blinked.
DC, I think the code was put to sleep in 2010.
Yeah.
It had served its purpose. It was useless. It was an appendix, Right. It was just cause trouble. Right. It was nothing it could really do. But frankly, back in my day, I never had anything rejected by the code because I knew the rules. I knew what I was writing for. A 5-page intro for House of Mystery isn't going to be breaking much ground that's going to be bothering the code.
I never thought about that. That's a good point you bring up, that not only did a 5 or 6 page story have to have a beginning, middle, and end, but they almost always introduced characters you didn't know. Like a lot of times that character was going to die in that story or something, so.
Pager is a world, is world building.
Yeah. I can only imagine that led to some really strong writing chops, as evidenced by your career. It's one of the strongest careers in comics out there. I mean, I would put that up against anybody's. So here's some other stuff people might not know about you. You were, for a time, the editor of the Weekly World News.
Yes, I was.
Now, I know that Bat Boy had been way before you took over as the editor, but was he still hanging around the offices at that point?
Oh yeah, Bad Boy, Bigfoot, Plod, the alien advisor to President Clinton. Yeah, all the time. Yeah, we spoke regularly. Yeah, no, it was the best gig I ever had. I had been writing for them for a while, and the executive editor was an old friend, Jeff Rovin, who used to work at DC Comics many years ago in the early 70s. He was one of Joe Kubert's assistants, and he did some writing. And then he later became one of Tom Clancy's collaborators. But anyway, he was editing the paper and wanted to change up the staff. So he hired me. He also hired Bob Greenberger from DC Comics. And we in turn hired designers and art directors from the DC staff. So it was like old home week. And plus, putting together a 48-page tabloid in the space of a week. I used to do 6 to 8 comic books a month. 22-page comic books a month. A 48-page tabloid is nothing.
So let me ask you this. Like behind the scenes in the editorial and among the writers, what is the tone? I mean, are you having fun or, I mean, what is going on here?
It's just, it's like the whole idea of those stories is to take, a plausible grain. You start with that bit of sand, that plausible bit of sand, and you throw it into the oyster, and you wait for it to develop this story oyster. And you just got to like one of my favorite things that I wrote was about a story about a fight that broke out at a dyslexics convention because everybody at the drawing thought they had the winning ticket.
Yeah, I can only imagine the writers for just being completely amused at themselves the whole time they're writing. So did you have like feedback? Were there people out there that like really thought that you were like the only source of truth out there? To like they were
source, but they believed us. I had neighbors back in the old days, when I was married and living, and we were at a party at one of the neighbors, and she's originally from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, that area. And her stepfather, very nice man named Lloyd. Every week he went to the Piggly Wiggly and he picked up his tabloids. And when he heard I was working for them, he asked me, "Where do you get your stories?"
You're like, "Well, we have informants, and we have."
Well, I said that. My ex-wife nudged me and made me tell him the truth. But we maintain the fiction. If called, we maintain the fiction. No, we are the world's reliable newspaper, and the only time I ever broke it was this guy called up. He introduced himself as some kind of clergyman, and he, after decades of research, had uncovered the location of the Garden of Eden and had he'd written the book to reveal this, and he wanted the Weekly World News to publish excerpts from it. And I said, well, I kept it up for a little, and finally I realized he was serious. So I said, look, I said, we make everything up. It's all lies. Nothing published is true. And he went, oh, I know, but this is.
But for once.
Something I could. I gave it for the New York Times.
So how big, I guess you were the editor starting in, 2007, something along those lines?
2006 till it ended in 2007.
Okay, so at that time it was still a print tabloid, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because it looks like it's still active and very much publishing new. There's still do you have anything to do with the publication at all right now?
I have nothing. Actually, a friend and I tried to acquire it after it first folded in 2007, and we actually looked like we were on our way to getting it. Plans on what to do with it, which now 15 years later, it's like would have been totally out the window anyway. Everything, but still, I haven't really had anything to do with it. I haven't. The little I've seen hasn't been terribly amusing.
You almost need to invent a new term to represent the energy of the print edition's cover. The energy that would come off the rack at you with that, it was just, they were like all works of art.
Yeah. In fact, the next book I'm publishing is called The Devil and Leo Persky. And Leo Persky is a reporter for a fictional newspaper, very much like the Weekly World News, except in this world, everything they print is true.
Is true. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, and he's a little, geeky guy who goes around getting in trouble. And so I already published half a dozen short stories featuring him and his mother, actually. I wrote one about his mother. And I recently wrote a new novella, The Devil and Leo Persky, so I'm putting them all in a book, which will be out sometime this month. And the cover is a takeoff on the Weekly World.
On the Weekly World News.
Like dead on.
That sounds, that must have been, even being the editor during the final, with the internet coming along and being so disruptive to print publications, that had to be fun.
Well, it was also disappointing because I was hired both as an editor and, to do writing and all that, but part of my job was licensing. Because I had just come out of several years. My last few years at DC had been in the licensing department. So I had already, had set up a deal for action figures, Batboy and stuff to start doing action figures. I had Diamond who was going to start carrying us into comic book shops.
That stuff would sell. I guarantee it would sell. People love that kind of stuff.
The company nixed the Diamond plan, which actually would have put the paper in the black. Would have been 2,000 copies a week would have, of non-returnable material. I don't know how much you know about the print publishing, especially back in those days, but it's expensive. You don't just publish it and send it out and the guy on the other end takes his cut. Walmart takes their cut if it sells and if it doesn't sell. We were still paying, $50 a copy on the racks, even if it didn't sell. So, so we had this non-returnable deal with Diamond, but the company nixed it because the distributor didn't like that idea, their distributor. But their distributor was owned by the company that publishes the...
So you got, the merchandise would be outperforming the paper. Yeah.
But it should have lived longer.
I would go so far as to say that the Weekly World News is... I don't know if I would say it's Americana. It's darn close, but it's
up there.
It's got a very beloved place in pop culture.
Yeah, and it introduced, evergreen concepts into pop culture.
Yeah.
Batboy will live forever. Elvis sightings were invented by the Weekly World News. And
I would even, and I'm not trying to get political. I'm just saying that this instant acceptance of reptile overlords among certain, we're really being ruled by reptiles. That got into the public consciousness through stuff like that.
Our biggest sellers were Tours Through Heaven and Hell with angels. Rednecks shoot down angels.
That'd be a dream job to write for the Weekly World News, I think. It was awesome. I was really well paid to do a fairly easy job with my friends. Yeah, doesn't get much better than that. So, I'll tell you, I wanted to make sure people because I bet you a lot of people don't know that you did the Weekly World News if they're mainly just comic book fans. So I want to make sure people knew about that. And also, you're the man who killed Adrian Chase, the original Vigilante. And,
right.
and based on my, on your description of this, it was with relish because you were like, this guy's a Looney Tunes
comic book mass murderer.
Yeah, no, he was. And even when Marv Wolfman was writing Vigilante, he wasn't presenting him like, some angel or something like that. But I think that when you took it over, you're like, this guy is.
Look, in the history of humanity, seriously, no one has ever put on a costume and gone out into the night to fight crime.
Right.
I mean, people may have joked around and, somebody may have done it, once or twice. Nobody has ever I'm going to go and clean up this city. So if you really would do something like that, you're knucking fucks.
It's true, and that's where you like that's where you have to go. Okay, like now I'm not talking about comics as a art form. You can take a story wherever you want,
Right.
But mainstream comics, DC, Marvel style, it's a fantasy, right? You can't think about it too hard. Like Batman running around in real life would be an incredibly troubling individual. So you got to kind of willing suspension of disbelief and just enjoy it for the fantasy of it.
Back when I was reading Batman originally, and the end of the Jack Schiff era, the science fiction-y Batman, where he's fighting robots and all that stuff,
and giant typewriters,
and giant typewriters, absolutely. Yeah. I have an old typewriter, an old Corona typewriter, with a Batman action figure purchase.
Oh, because it's a giant typewriter, nice.
But back then, it could be plausible because it was all so implausible. The whole world was fantasy. You didn't for a second think that anybody existed in the world drawn by, Dick Sprang. You get to Neil Adams, well, that's a real world, man. These people are living, breathing, hairy human beings. And it becomes real. And that's what took over. That reality took over, in the art and the writing. And sure, it was being written by, it started being written by people who had grown up on the material and wanted to make it, I'm going to say elevated, but that's really not the word. They wanted to bring it more up to their level of sophistication, for want of a better word.
I grew up on comics when they were, I really went nuts on comics in the 80s.
Yeah.
And to me, that's my first love.
Right. Grim and gritty, down and dirty. Right. We came to, that became a thing. Like, well, okay, I can do that. Frankly, after a dozen years of writing guys in costumes who could fly and get punched through walls and stand back up, it was a relief to write somebody who wasn't a superhero. My whole run of Vigilante, I kept the costumes to a minimum. I didn't have super villains in there. I wasn't writing a superhero comic. I was writing a street level, comic about a crazy guy who ran around killing people.
Yeah, it's basically what was the Charles Bronson movie? It was like a comic book version of that. A guy with a gun cleaning up.
The Punisher is the same thing. It's like my family got killed. I'll seek revenge.
Right. Which again, it's wish fulfillment. It's fantasy or whatever. It has its place, but anytime it's like Alan Moore famously was shocked that everyone loved Rorschach because he's like, Rorschach is a psychopathic scumbag. You're not supposed to like him. When you put him on the comic book page, and I guess he's not real, people like, think he's great. But yeah, Alan Moore was like, no, you're not supposed to like Rorschach.
Why is Wolverine so popular?
Right.
They turned Batman into a psychopath, and now that's all they publish is Batman comics.
I still like the more, I guess, early modern age comics. That's still my I saw Dark Knight Returns come along, and I saw Watchmen come along, and I saw the other stuff come along, and they're very, very good stories. But I haven't always been happy with how the industry has quote unquote matured, to where it can't just be fun anymore, and it's like if somebody has a code against killing, people are like, well, that's stupid. It was like, no, it's a fantasy. It's somebody trying to stand against the darkness. But I like, I just love comic books. My first love is superhero comics, but I love the medium in general.
I was reading comic, I don't remember there not being comic books in my life. My brother was a couple of years older than me. He read comics. We lived right, in the building next door to my grandmother and my uncle, who was, he was 10 when I was born. My mother's brother. So he read comic books. So, from as soon as I'm conscious, there's, Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and Wonder Woman for some reason. Wonder Woman was the first superhero comic I read. It was back around 59, 60. It was Bob Kanigher and Andrew Esposito. And Kanigher had turned it into this kind of fairy tale, kids book. lots of genies and dragons, and that's where Bird Boy and Mer Boy were introduced, and Wonder Girl and Wonder Tot, which were originally different ages of one, not different characters. But anyway, all that stuff, it was a great, in 1960, fairy tale kind of stuff, because television was and remains, for morons, but more so back then. If you look back at sitcoms from the 50s and 60s, I can't imagine what they thought of us.
It's kind of an essay on what they thought of the average American, maybe? Is that kind of what you're saying?
The whole, that Aaron Sorkin, I Love Lucy movie, it recounts one of the difficulties that she had was she was pregnant, and they thought they'd have to end the show because they couldn't have a pregnant woman on TV. It's like, we can't show a pregnant woman on TV. There are pregnant women watching this. Why can't you?
Yeah, there's kind of, it's like the husband and wife had separate beds and all that stuff, yeah.
How, I don't know. It's just, it continues to amaze me, it's more in advertising these days. I'm actively insulted by advertising, especially the ones about fathers. Because Dad's always a moron. Yeah,
Dad is in popular culture, popular on TV anyway. Dad's a buffoon, and that's a problem.
My kid was little. I'd be out with him, and people go, stuck babysitting? No, it's called child care.
Yeah.
My child. I am not babysitting my child. Yeah. I'm caring.
Right. He's my son. Yeah. Well, yeah, I've actually seen analysis and essays on the constant. And it's not just dads who get shafted on TV. I don't want to say, but yeah, I've actually seen pretty good discussion and analysis on the negative effects of that, of dad's always at best, an affable buffoon,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, and this is interesting. You're talking about the different types of comics, and, you're also one thing I've discovered getting ready to talk to you for this podcast was how much of a Archie Andrews fan you are. Now, I knew that you wrote some Archie, but I didn't realize that you are the man who killed Archie Andrews in the Life of Archie comics. So, what is Archie meant to you? Evidently quite a bit.
Well, Archie, I didn't write Archie until 2009. That was the first time I ever wrote that. I had written 4 Archie comics before that, some advertising comics for Radio Shack, the TRS-80 computer.
Yeah, I remember that, affectionately known as the Trash 80. I have nothing against the TRS-80, but...
Yeah, I grew up reading, Archie was one of the whatever, 7...
Archie was ubiquitous. Everybody had Archie comic.
At one point, I must have been like 12 years old. I traded literally 30, whatever comic books for 300 Archies. And I read every single one of them and loved them. Back then in the 60s, there were, 7 or 8 comic book companies. You could pretty much pick up everything. Archie, it's funny, everybody talks DC and Marvel, but when it comes to sales, Archie was kicking their asses.
Yeah.
Richie Rich, all that stuff, outselling DC and Marvel a lot of the times. So I was always a fan, and I dipped in and out of Archie comics my entire life. You every now and then you pick up, let's see what's going on in Archie, and what was going on was the same exact thing, only in different clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was cool. It was like you could always go to Archie. You could always rely on Archie. It's very tough.
Yeah, it's fun. Especially now when you came along and they were doing the Life of Archie and all these different, they've had like Archie horror comics and they've had this and that. Right. But for decades, Archie was just comfortable fun. You could count on it.
You had their superhero line, that they periodically tried. Great characters that's never been able to get any traction on them. And I got to work on some of those at DC Comics as the Impact Comics line. I got to be the editor of The Fly and Black Hood and write some of the later stories. But the Archie stuff, in 2009, I started, in a few years before that, I started pitching to Archie, to Victor Gorlick. I mean, I had known Victor for years, so, you know, it was like suddenly I went, oh, I should try to sell to Archie. You know, I've been selling some stuff to Bongo Comics for the Bart Simpson title. So I got in touch with Victor and, you know, started buying the shorts from me, the comedy stuff. And they were very easy to write for me. I mean, it's like, you know, I realized that all these years of, you know, keeping up with Archie, I had absorbed them. They're not, you know, on the surface, they're very simple characters. You know, you can define any one of the Archie characters in, like, you know, 2 or 3 words. But if you start looking at them, if they say to you, here's your opportunity to treat them like real people, like grown-ups, adults, you know, you're writing these stories about real things happening in their lives. And I said, what kind of things? They said, anything you think will be interesting. You know, they never said no to any of the story ideas I had for Life with Archie. You know, breast cancer, gun violence, whatever the gay. Well, I didn't come up with the gay marriage, but you know, but anything I wanted to do, first story arc, I said, can I kill Miss Grundy? And they went, is it going to be a good story? And I went, I think so. And they went, okay, you know. So they were open to letting me do whatever as long as I was. So I found them very easy and comfortable to write, you know. I knew who Archie was. Archie is the guy. Archie doesn't trip over his own feet all the time because he's a klutz. He is tripping over his own feet because he's so over anxious to be the good guy, to be helpful. You know, he's just tripping over himself to help you. You know, he means no harm. He's not an evil bone in his body. You know, Jughead is the smartest kid in Riverdale. Jughead can convince anybody to do anything. You know, I did this one story, this short, where he gets the gang to dig up his backyard to the septic system by, you know, hiding a treasure map, you know, in the attic that they happen to find.
Yeah,
so,
sometimes
you know,
the laziest people are the cleverest. Yeah.
And you know, Moose isn't an idiot. Moose is dyslexic.
You know, that caught my eye when I was reading up on your work with Life of Archie, was that, you know, you did stuff like that Miss Grundy figured out that he was dyslexic and not just, you know, an idiot.
Yeah.
So yeah, just so people know, if they're not familiar, Life of Archie, you know, as you pointed out, was like sort of a realistic take on Archie, I guess. Not super realistic, but like these are real people living real lives. They're not just doing gags. They're not just 2-dimensional gag characters.
There was one story, you know, what if Archie marries Veronica? So there were 2 separate storylines going.
Which is genius, because there's going to be some people that are going to be mad if he marries Veronica and some people Betty. So that was genius. That was very smart.
Although in the last issue, when he has to look up and go, I've always loved you, and they're both kneeling over him because we couldn't make that one story,
right,
you know, universe specific. So I had to do those whole last 2 issues, which is the death of and the 1 year later, you know, aftermath thing, without ever saying which world this is.
And that leads, okay, so, I mean, everybody, you know, Betty and Veronica are like Mary and Ginger Ann or other, like everybody has a preference, even though you like both characters, right?
Sure.
So if you had your druthers, who would you have Archie get with? Or who would you, you know, if you had the choice, who would you want to date?
I've always had a thing for Reggie, but that's me.
For Reggie.
Because it would be the wrong choice, I'd go for Veronica.
Yeah. I think that I've always been partial to Veronica, but I think it would be the better move to go with Betty. That's what I've always thought. Yeah. And, you know, and I'm not, I mean, I like Archie. I grew up with Archie, of course, and Jughead and the gang and all the you know, the gags and all that. I couldn't watch, and I'm all for different interpretations of characters and all that, but I personally was not, I'm not into what, like they did that Riverdale TV show. I don't know if you saw any of it, but it seemed very dark to me.
Also, you're not a 13-year-old girl.
Okay, so that's an important point I wanted to bring up when we were talking about comics, and the different eras of comics and this and that. I read a thing not that long ago where a guy was recounting a visit to the DC offices when he was pretty young. And this is when Julius Schwartz was still there. And they were talking about something. And the kid, when he was a kid, he said, well, I would have this character do whatever. And Julius Schwartz went, how old are you? And he said, I'm 13. And he's like, you're already too old. You're not my target audience. So I think people forget, when we take these characters so seriously, and it's, like I said, you can interpret or you can do cool things with, I'm not against what Frank Miller did. I'm not against in fact, I love those stories. But the superhero comics as we think of, that was the ground that led all of this stuff, was for kids. It was power fantasies for kids.
The trick was they read comics from, 8 to 13. In the early 1960s, when DC started doing the 80-page giants, the stories they reprinted were mostly from 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years prior to when the reprints were being done, because they knew that nobody who read that story 3 years ago is still reading comic books. And if he did, probably not going to remember that story.
I think that a lot of the editors of old and a lot of the creators of old, if they met me, they're like, you're weird, dude, because you've been reading comics since you're, 10 or 11 and you're still into them. That wasn't the concept of what was going to happen, right?
No. But also, it's kind of gotten, the doors have been thrown open. Everybody thinks they know how the sausage is made. I see all these things online about people, suppositions about why this was done or that was done or this was done. And I got to laugh. They're thinking complicated motives, and it's like, dude, they didn't think that 3 years ago to set this up now after three writers. Believe me, it was just a coincidence, right. That type of thing. Or the motive for doing these things. It's just, they don't know how it works, but they think they do. They
think they do, yeah.
And I think the thing that I think best defines the problem overall with having older readers who, have developed these things. I heard, a discussion a few years ago at a convention, people talking about whatever the book was, whatever the writer was. And one of the people in the discussion said, yeah, and that's when the writer stopped doing what I thought he should.
Well, right. It's like this. It's like, well, that's not how it works. You're either entertained by the story or not. But if the artists do exactly what you want, how can you be entertained?
Yeah, exactly. The reader has no say in the story. The reader has a reaction to the story.
Yeah.
I don't care what you expect, because if I get what you expect, you would tell me you were bored because I expected that. But if I don't give you what you expect, what you want, you think, I'm terrible because, I can't do it right the way you would do it. And by the way, I've read enough fan fiction to know they don't know.
They don't know. Well, everybody's an expert till they do it, right? So there's a lot of Monday morning, or what is it? Not Monday morning, armchair quarterbacking and Monday morning quarterbacking. Yeah. So those are good points. And to clarify, I said something earlier, my take on Julius Schwartz or these old editors, I don't think they were mean-spirited people. I think they would have been more like, that's a weird development that people are still reading these comics.
I knew Julie pretty well. I mean, I worked with him for years, and we stayed, we stayed in touch and, traveled together a couple of times to conventions. I traveled with him, when he was older. And so, I for all his faults, I love Julie Schwartz. He was, the grandpa I never had, and also a great editor.
Right.
But he knew what he didn't know. It reached a point where I would pitch stories to him, where he'd go, I don't get it, but, go ahead and do it.
Right.
That's pretty much, that's what you kids like these days.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, give him that. It was tough for these guys. Julie started in 1944. He has seen, he was there practically, in the early walking stages of the industry, and saw it through to adulthood. He ended his run on Superman having Alan Moore write it. You don't get much more up to date at that point than that.
Was that the issue?
So,
the whatever happened to the Man of Steel? Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what did somebody like you, like I love all eras of comics. What was it like? Because this has come up a couple of times. I mean, you're an established veteran of comics. You've written a lot of stories. What was it like to see like that second or third generation that grew up on comics, like Alan Moore, and come along and do these? Like, what were you like? This is great, or were you like, what the heck are they doing? I mean, what was it like to see that change in the kinds of stories that were being written in mainstream comics? Not,
Yeah. I may not have always agreed with the approach, or cared for the stories even, but I don't have any objections. I may have storytelling problems, or I may have whatever, but as far as the books themselves, the Dark Knight, Watchmen, my main thing about Watchmen is I'm glad DC didn't let Moore screw up the Charlton character.
As a lot of people don't. Well, I think more people know these days is that they're all analogs for the Charlton characters.
Yeah. So but hey, Watchmen has been a phenomenal success, and DC has sold millions and millions of copies of that graphic novel. My feeling is, I like what I like, you like what you like. We don't have to like the same things, but I don't have a problem with what you like, and I don't care if you don't like what I like. It doesn't affect me. Your judgment doesn't matter to me. I'm secure enough in my judgment.
That sounds like a dangerously mature approach to life, Paul.
Well, because the last 2 years I've been living in this infantile zoo called the internet. You cannot make I love cherry pie. Within 3 comments, you got some schmuck telling you that it stains his teeth and he doesn't like to eat it. I don't care. Why are you pissed on my enjoyment of pie?
Well, and within 5 comments, somebody's invoked Godwin's law. So,
and go start your own thread about your stained teeth. Leave me alone.
Right.
Let me enjoy.
Yeah. You see jokes like somebody will say, here's a picture of a stick or here's a rock. Now argue. Yeah. And there's some truth to it. So, well, let's talk about this. You've done so much. Like I could touch on any one element of your career and do an entire show on just that.
I think I'm worth it.
Yeah, we'll do a series. This is the first in a series of 50 interviews with Paul Kupperberg about his comics work.
Get to the ones on my work on Mad Libs.
Yeah. Did you do Mad Libs too?
I've done Mad Libs.
I loved Mad Libs.
I wrote a book called Careers in Robotics. I wrote a book called How to Be a Rodeo Clown. I've written a bunch of books for the for the school library market back in the early 2000s, and it was like I also wrote one on the 1918 influenza pandemic, and on the depression and fun stuff, the sinking of the Titanic. But along the way there was rodeo clowns and
So having written a book on the influenza pandemic of, was it 1918, I think? What perspectives does that give you on what we're dealing with right now?
Oh, well, even with my limited knowledge and, the fact that this was 15 years ago that I wrote it, it was like, I heard, you hear about these spreading, where it starts and where it spreads. And it's like, well, that was called the Spanish flu because it was first recognized in Spain, but it actually got started in Kansas. So the first cases were actually, back in Kansas. And it was the first time the world had been hit by, it didn't have to be an epidemic, a pandemic, but World War I. Oops. You had all these soldiers being shipped across the sea to Europe, and suddenly this stuff is just, it's all over the place. And as soon as this thing started spreading, it was like, this is going to be, the numbers aren't going to be as bad because thank God we've got science now. But, but it's going to be, I knew it was going to be pretty bad. I mean, I just,
Well, I wonder if there's any parallels. Like, I think that it's easy within a generation or two to forget the realities of life. And I wonder if, like, a lot of people, like lockdowns, this and that and the other. And there was a lot of that stuff going on, basically 100 years ago. And I think, based on old articles I read and stuff, and a lot of people are like, this is unprecedented. And I'm like, no, I don't really think it's unprecedented. It's just, it's unprecedented in our scope of experience.
They estimate there are some estimates that go from well over 100 million people dying.
Well, on to more cheerful topics. Your Twitter status or your Twitter handle currently says, Paul, pre-order Supertown Kupperberg. Would you like to tell us about Supertown? And Supertown is all in caps.
It is Supertown, and it's all about, I'll just read you the back cover copy. Evil can't hide when the Whiz Kid is on patrol. All young Wally Crenshaw wants is to be a super, ever since he saw Hyperion and the Justice Brigade save the day in Washington, D.C. But nothing ever happens in his hometown. A strange atmospheric anomaly means the internet is only on a couple hours a day, and cell phones don't work there at all. In many ways, Crumbly by the Sea, New Jersey, is a town that technology forgot. And that's exactly why a certain super has retired there, hoping never to have to risk his life and limb fighting superpowered villains or dimensional aliens ever again. But sleepy Crumbly by the Sea is about to get a wake-up call, and things may never be the same again. Again. It's from Armchair Books, and it's available on Amazon for pre-order.
And it's Supertown by Paul Kupperberg. So, man, you seem incredibly prolific. Like you've got, I was doing some research. You kickstarted a book not that long ago. That was, I guess you don't write for money, but you always,
yes.
Yeah, but you always send in
But I always turn in the manuscript for a check. It's about my experience in writing and some, little writing tips and stuff and experiences in and after, a career in comic books. So, yeah, I did that. I've done that year. I think I did 3 or 4 books published. I had my Paul Kupperberg's Illustrated Guide to Writing Comics.
Are those all currently available right now? Like if somebody wants to get them right now?
Oh yeah. They're all available on Amazon. Paul Kupperberg's Illustrated Guide to Writing Comics, which is exactly what it sounds like. There's also the JSA Ragnarok novel, which is a Justice Society of America.
So it's prose, but it's JSA?
All prose. It's a novel I wrote in 2005 that didn't get published due to a whole string of reasons at the time, and finally last year, the year before, able to work things out so I could publish it in a limited edition.
I love the idea of it. Have you seen any of the Stargirl TV show? There's a lot of JSA love in that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's I don't watch a lot of those. I don't watch any of this stuff because, again, not a 13-year-old girl. But but that seemed to be well done.
So, do you consider yourself more of a JSA guy or a JLA guy, or do you like both equally?
Well, it's funny. I came in right at the cusp, Flash 121, the Flash of Two Worlds.
Right. Yeah. Huge issue.
Yes, it was the story that introduced the concept of the multiverse to the DC universe. I saw that. I didn't see the original, which was published in 61, I think, 62. But first time I saw it, I was like 10 years old. It was a Flash annual reprint. And I read this story, and I get to the panel after Flash runs across the bridge into Keystone City, and he goes over to the newsstand, and he picks up a newspaper, and he goes, Keystone City, my God, I can read it. John Byrne did a reproduction of the panel for me as a birthday present. A glance at a newspaper at a nearby stand reassures him. June 14th, 1961. Well, the date's right, but the place and everything else isn't. So he's looking at the Keystone City Herald newspaper with the date of June 14th, 1961, and my birthday is June 14th. Here I am at 10 years old, and by 10, the multiverse, I'd already seen the JSA and the JLA, in the crossovers by then, because there had been a bunch of stories between 61 and 65 when I saw the reprint. So it was like the multiverse was born on my birthday.
That's pretty neat.
I am here. I am the rest of my life. JLA all the way, but I love writing the JSA novel. I had it's set in 1945 and in current modern day 2005. So the sections set in 1945 with the JSA were just so much fun to write. Just getting to write all the Golden Age versus guys. It was just a ball.
Did you get to have some fun with Johnny Thunder? Did you do anything? That's always characters always kind of fascinated me with his lightning bolt.
Yeah, I didn't have much room to use him in the 40s section. There was just too much magic going around, and I had to kind of neutralize him because the villain's wizard, and it's a whole Ragnarok thing. The Last Days of the Justice League story by Roy.
Absolutely.
This is kind of an extension of that. This is, that demon comes back, Sorter comes back, and he's like, you're coming back with me, back to, in the Ragnarok to fight, to fight every day through the rest of eternity. So that's the basis of this, and trying to escape his clutches again.
Yeah, if listeners aren't aware, the Ragnarok story you're talking about is so after Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they combined everything into one Earth, and they had all these little loose pieces of, they're like, well, how does the JSA fit into this new thing? So they, in my opinion, they gave them a very strong send-off where they basically had them fighting Searcher, to prevent the end of the world over and over and over and over. But of course, they eventually brought them back and everything. But it's an example of the kind of writing gymnastics you have to do when you're like, well, we got to make all this stuff fit together, or the fans will get upset.
Serialized fiction over the course of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is like, what next? I mean, that was the idea behind Crisis. I think it was a misguided idea. But that was the idea behind Crisis. Like, well, we'll just knock it all down and start from the beginning, only to make it more complicated. Because like Roy decided he had to explain. The original idea of Crisis was it would be done and never mentioned again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, really? We were never supposed to mention it again. It was like you're starting from scratch. Go. Roy I love Roy. He's the boy. I love him, but he had to fix those continuity things.
When Paul keeps mentioning Roy, he's referring to Roy Thomas, who had a very strong career in comics as well, with both Marvel and DC. One time he was even the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, but he wrote the Last Days of the Justice Society one-shot we're talking about here, along with his wife, Dan Thomas.
And other writers went, well, if Roy can do it, then I can do it. And, the whole thing just unraveled.
I was 12 or 13 when Crisis came out. And I absolutely loved it. It blew me away. So did Secret Wars from Marvel. I love them both dearly. Seeing what has happened in the comics world with event marketing and having a crisis every few years, as much as I love them, I wish neither of them had ever happened for what they did, how they rippled out and affected. We got to have another crisis. We got to reboot again. And it's just like, I don't know. But the original Crisis on Infinite Earth was a heck of a powerful event. And I'll give it that.
Other than Showcase 100, you'd never seen anything like it. Do you remember Showcase 100? It was written by Paul Levitz and myself and drawn by Joe Staten. And it was a 36-page story in which we featured every character who had ever appeared in Showcase. You
listed that in your 13 favorite issues you've ever written. How did you do that? How did you fit that many characters into 36 pages?
Well, Well, I sat, I don't remember many plotting sessions, but I remember we spent an afternoon at his apartment plotting Showcase 100, and, trying to fit everybody in, make, a modicum of sense.
Some sense, yeah.
And the idea was that every character that had graduated into its own feature or series would be in the story. We figured we could limit it that way so, it wouldn't be too overwhelming. And when we got the pages back, Joe just threw everybody else in. The other characters that didn't get their own. So there's Dolphin making an appearance, and there's, Manhunter 2070 making an appearance. And Joe just shoved them in there.
See, I love stuff like that. And Showcase is an example of that kind of anthology comic that we started talking about, at the beginning of the conversation, where you could just put stuff in there and see if people would like it. It was a great tryout.
It kind of became redundant in the direct market days, because the original concept behind Showcase was put out a concept, and then you could wait 6 months till sales figures are in and see if it sold, and then launch it off into a series. If you weren't sure, then you do a couple of tryouts. Again, it used to literally take 6 or more months for finalized sales figures to be gathered. So a comic book that came out in June, you didn't know how it sold until December. So you were always 6 months behind. But at least with Showcase, you could have an idea of how the concept would sell. But then you get into the direct market where, the order, your orders, before you publish the comic, you know your numbers. So it doesn't matter. You don't need that. Plus, you've got the advantage of having all these number ones, which used to be a disadvantage. If you look at, Justice League of America, Green Lantern, I think the Atom as well, there's no number on the first issues. There's no number one on it because they thought, that readers wouldn't trust something new. They wanted something tried and true. That's why when they put Flashback in a monthly comic, they started the numbering from the 1949 or 51 series. That's why he started at 105 instead of number one, because number one was bad.
Well, there's so much. I mean, I don't want to keep you over long. There's a few more topics that, I'd like to bring up here. We've already spent an hour talking, so I don't want to abuse your time. But if you're okay, I have a couple more things I'd like to mention. One, I want to point out that you wrote the first miniseries, and miniseries are very common now. Now, was that your idea to do a miniseries, or how did that happen?
His idea to do a miniseries. The World of Krypton, a 3-issue story.
Now, this isn't the John Byrne World of Krypton. This is from, I think, 1979.
No, this is me and E. Nelson Bridwell and Howard Chaykin and Murphy Anderson. And it was originally intended to be a 3-issue arc in Showcase. But the movie got to come out coinciding with the movie. Then the movie got pushed back, and Showcase got canceled. And then when the movie was finally coming out, DC realized that it didn't have any product for the time with the movie because they weren't allowed to do any adaptations of the film because of a contractual problem with Mario Puzo, who wrote the original screenplay. So they couldn't do straight adaptations. That's why they rushed out Elliot Magen's Superman novel instead of doing a novelization of the movie, because you couldn't. So they remembered the World of Krypton 3-issue Showcase arc that was in the drawer, and they just threw it out there. It really was just like, get it on the stand. You need something. It accidentally became the first miniseries.
Which, I mean, that's an important piece of comic book history because miniseries became increasingly important.
Yeah, it was a whole new concept. Recently, a few years before that, had been on television. Had been Roots and Rich Man Poor Man, which were television miniseries, which were the first of their kind. So I guess it was just in the air.
Well, there's so much. Yeah, I really recommend people and I'll put some links, again, go to the show notes at shaneplays.com. People won't believe how many different comic books and series you've written until they actually go look at your bibliography. You know, I'm just looking, I could pick out so much here that you've worked on, you know, but I do want to, there's a couple of characters I want to throw out there just because they're relevant in what's happening on TV right now. So there's going to be people that are naturally curious about the characters. We already talked a little bit about Vigilante. I still can't remember the name of that Charles Bronson movie, and I've seen those movies a million times. I can't believe I can't remember them.
Well, you know, because you can't remember, it infected me. It is Death Wish.
Death Wish, right. We'll talk about Peacemaker here in a second. And I just want to preface it by the Peacemaker you're seeing in the Suicide Squad movie and on HBO Max, other than the appearance, is pretty different probably than the Peacemaker that Paul. You don't think he's okay?
I think actually, after watching a few episodes, I realized the characters, the tone is right. The character dynamics with Peacemaker, with Christopher Smith, are the same. It's just he's put him in with a different rest of the cast. So, you know, in my version in the 80s, in the miniseries I did, he heard voices in his helmet. He believed his helmet absorbed the souls of the people he kills, and is and also the soul of his dead father, who was a Nazi concentration commandant, is in there, kind of goading him on, you know, kicking his ass and telling him he's worthless and all that, you know, but you can't do it. I mean, you know, the Peacemaker miniseries was 30 years ago when Nazis were still plausible.
His father in the TV show is still pretty scary.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, but that's the same. It's just a different character. And Gunn, you know, James Gunn has, when I first heard about the Peacemaker thing, I jokingly tweeted to James Gunn, it's like, yeah, I'm the guy who sounds like a lot of your, you know, series may have, been not based on,
right.
But, you know. And he goes, no, you're all over this. He goes, you know, I was reading Checkmate and Vigilante while I was writing the Suicide Squad movie. You know, he goes, this is definitely all on you.
How does that, and I'm not asking you to brag or something like that, I'm just curious, how does that make a creator feel when 30 years later a movie and TV show director of James Gunn's caliber comes along and is impressed enough with what you wrote to, you know what I'm saying, to inform what he's doing? How does that feel?
It's great. And, you know, it's a compliment, you know. I think money's a bigger compliment, but it's still a compliment. DC gives me, you know, there's a contract, you know, with DC, and they pay up for use of things like this, and
right.
You know. But in comparison with what the budget of these things, you know, we're like, you know, I think craft service spends more money than I got. But still, no, it's cool. It really is. It's like, you know, it's validation. It's nice to see that this stuff, I mean, yeah, you know, fans remember it. And to this day, people come up to me at conventions and I'm signing Peacemakers and Vigilantes and all that stuff. But, you know, it's nice to see that it had some impact beyond that. I think, you know, my impact on Archie comics, you know, the Life with Archie comic, I don't think they would have gone ahead with the horror stuff and the other kind of.
And that stuff is sold very well. I've been impressed with how well that, you know, because at first I was like, what are they doing here? But then I started reading about it's been very well received. Like, not just as I want to buy this and stick it in a box and sell it in 10 years as a collectible, but like people are really enjoying what they're doing.
I was getting, you know, people reacted more. There was more sincerity and depth of feeling from fans for the Archie stuff than anything I've ever worked on.
Really? See, that's saying something with as much as you've worked.
Yeah, there was, and the death the reaction, the death of Archie, and you know, it was all built up to, and there was a story reason, and again, you know, when I said before Archie will trip over his own feet to to help a friend, he will also take a bullet for a friend. And he did. And so I think the story was well in character, and the people who don't understand the alternate world, the what if story, it's like the outrage over killing a character like Archie, as though I could do it if the publisher didn't let me.
Right.
Was incredible from all over the world. I was interviewed, India, Great Britain, Germany. It's like it was worldwide news.
I have to ask, with you saying that, Archie's a famous character.
Yeah.
But he's always, up until, like the time frame you were doing the stuff and the publisher was experimenting, it was, like I said, it was just comfort, two-dimensional gags, that kind of stuff. Were you surprised, or did you have a sense that Archie was that popular worldwide?
I didn't know how popular Archie was. It was also interesting just as a writer to kind of go off, again, I've written, if I never wrote another superhero comic book story, I think I'd be okay, I think I could deal with that.
It's really you that retired into Crumbly, isn't it? In Supertown.
That's right.
It's really you retired.
Actually, that Supertown was what earned a rejected, I can't say it was rejected, it was ignored, proposal for a Trickster series at DC Comics. So, that's what you do with old material. It was something Steve Stefano and I were developing. But the Archie stuff was a surprise. It was just, after writing it for a while, I kind of felt it. Like, again, I mentioned the Miss Grundy death. When I wrote that, I wrote that page, and I was getting choked up, and it never happened. I may kind of grin or giggle at something I've written if it's a good line, but I was getting emotional, and I had to get up and walk away from the from the computer for a few minutes.
Wow!
Because I was killing, I killed Miss Grundy. I was like, oh my god, that's. And so, I really was drawn into this series. I think it was one of the better writing experiences I've ever had. I think it's probably my strongest sustained work. Especially considering I did 37 issues, but in reality, that's like 70 stories.
Right, because of the dual universe thing.
Well, right. So, and each month I'm writing 2 different stories, but with the same characters. I had to come up with a flow chart. So I remember Jughead is doing this in this one, and that in this one, and Reggie is this and that. So they were in different places, and I once sent in a script, and the editor sent it back and goes, "No, I think you meant this section for Betty." Because I Reggie in the wrong place, so acting like he's doing what he did in the Veronica.
Well, I still think that's absolutely genius to have parallel worlds with both, so that because part of you once seemed to be with Veronica, part of you once seemed to be with Betty, right? And so that's and nobody loses.
It's also an interesting, contrast because in the Betty continuity, Archie was teaching music at Riverdale High. And in the Veronica continuity, he was trying to, catch up and be a big businessman with Mr. Lodge, and not being able to stand the immorality that he finds there.
No, that's good stuff. That's one of the things I was very surprised when I started reading up to prepare for this talk, just how strong Archie featured. Which I love that. I love to be surprised. It's just like you're talking earlier about. In entertainment that, if I give you what you expect, you're not really being entertained. And so I love to be delighted and surprised when I'm talking with people or reading up on them. I want to recommend people again, go look up all the stuff that Paul Kupperberg has done. I mean, it's prose. He writes novels. He writes comic books. He's all over the place. He was the editor of the Weekly World News. You got
don't forget the Mad Libs.
The Mad Libs, that the cornerstone of your career is the Mad Libs.
I've written coloring books for like DreamWorks stuff, and yeah.
You have had a prolific and varied career. So
show me a paycheck.
You'll write it. You don't write for money, but you always turn in a manuscript for a check.
Oh, that's true. It's like whatever I'm writing, I'll do the best I possibly can on that job, and whether I'm getting paid top rate or bottom rate, like I don't think about it when I'm writing it. I only grumble and curse when I receive the check. But, I put the same effort into it.
Well, that's a mark of a professional. You're delivering no matter what rate you agree to, you're going to be a master craftsman. So before I forget, is there anything else I did want to now Peacemaker was originally a Charlton hero, right? Didn't he come from another company? Right. Okay. Vigilante, no, that was straight up a DC character.
Marv Wolfman created Vigilante for DC, in the Teen Titans.
Yeah, I think he popped up in an annual and then went on to do his own thing. And it was Adrian Chase, quite different from Vigilante in the HBO Max series. He was a kind of not exactly like the Punisher, but he lost some loved ones due to crime. He was a judge. And he got tired of, he's like, well, the people that get off on technicalities, I'm going to go take care of them as a vigilante. So, but now the vigilante in the TV series is more like kind of a zany friend, kind of the zany friend sitcom character almost. But is there anything that you want to share on Vigilante or Peacemaker since they're kind of in the public eye right now?
Well, I mean, they're difficult characters. I mean, the original Peacemaker in Charlton was kind of, he was standard issue good guy. His motto was, I love peace so much, I'm willing to fight for it. And when we brought him into Vigilante originally, it was like, no, I think Keith Giffen had done some groundwork on the Peacemaker character for an earlier project that DC was going to do with the Charlton characters. It was this Blockbuster Comics or Comic Cavalcade, whatever, a weekly comic featuring short serialized, like Action Comics Weekly would later be. There was supposed to be originally the Charlton one. I was writing Captain Atom for that. I wrote a 12-part serial for Captain Atom that, was never used. I don't think, maybe a couple of pages were drawn by Jose Delbo. So Keith had originally done it. I think Keith had come up with the voices in the helmet concept as well. And, I kind of expanded on it and added the Nazi daddy. But the original one was he loves peace so much he's willing to fight for it. And I turned it into he loves peace so much he's willing to kill for it.
Right. Which they've ran with in the TV show. I mean, yeah.
You know what? It's like you either have to rationalize him or just let him go, and I can rationalize the character. So just let him off the leash and make him, the crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of what they've done on the TV show. Just let him off the leash, but point him at the direction of the problem you want solved.
Like you said, the TV show, Peacemaker show is a sitcom. It's just a sitcom about violent psychopaths who like to, really with chainsaws, which is quite entertaining. But it is. So you do need the wacky next door neighbor, and that's Vigilante. And you need the daddy and mommy figure,
and you need an eagle that will give you hugs.
And you need a hugging eagle.
Every show could benefit from a hugging eagle. Well, I wanted to give you the chance because, we keep talking about the stuff you've done. Now, Wikipedia, which could be out of date, has you currently as a writer and executive editor at Charlton Neo Comics and Pick C Webcomics and a contributing author with Crazy 8 Press. How much of that is true?
Crazy 8 is still ongoing. Charlton Neo Comics was Roger McKenzie, Mort Todd, and myself. And we kind of resurrected the old Charlton Comics title because ain't nobody using it.
I do like those old Charlton characters, or the, you're talking about the Fly and some of those other characters. I think they're good characters.
Fly and Black Hood, that was Archie.
You're right. Yeah, I think they're doing them now as the Red Circle or something like that. But
right.
Yeah,
we just took the Charlton title. We've used some of the public domain characters that are out there, but mostly we encourage people to do original, stuff in the vein of the old Charlton comic. We were fine with 6 and 8 pages. We love that stuff. Most of our comics were anthologies. So it was just having fun. And after a while, it's fun, but I wrote about 250 pages of comics for this thing, and earned nothing. Nothing at all. No, not a penny.
Yeah.
And so you get tired of going to your friends and going, this will be fun, and plenty of them did. Bless them. I'd go and say, hey, I can't pay you, but let's do this and have some fun. Like Rick Burchett wanted to do a Western story, so I wrote him a Western story, and Rick Burchett drew me a Western story.
Oh, nice.
So, but after a while, you got to kind of go, okay, this was fun, but I need to concentrate on something that's gonna. The Dedo Persky out this month from Crazy 8 Press. You can check us out at crazy8press.com. You can check me out at paulkupperberg.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter.
And type Paul Kupperberg into Amazon. You got all kinds of cool stuff on Amazon.
Oh, yeah. All my books, all my current books, and looks like every old comic book I ever wrote, somebody has a copy for sale.
So what last question before I give you the bad joke of the week, because I always end the show with a bad joke. You've written so much, very, very varied and prolific, especially with DC Comics, but not just exclusively DC Comics. Do you have a character or team or title that you always wanted to work on but never got to?
Yeah, I actually did. I did get to work on the character, but it's one that I would love to return to. Conan.
Conan.
Go figure, right? I wrote one issue for Savage Sword of Conan back in the 90s. And it was just so much fun.
So you didn't have a specific storyline or something you wanted to do? It was just real fun to write him?
I came up with 3 different storylines that I could do with him, the fun to do. But yeah, I just liked the character. I was surprised. Like first I was just like calling editors at Marvel going, got work. And Mike Rockwitz, was kind enough to hook me up with an issue of Savage Sword. And it was just so much fun to write. I ever since I've wanted to get back to do more Conan.
And do you have any, like you're talking about, like, calling editors. I know that things have changed somewhat, but do you have your ear to the ground or any tips on aspiring comics writers, how they can get some work?
No clue. Like, how do you break into comics? I go, well, in 1975, now I have no clue. I don't know how to do it. Everybody who I ever worked with is either dead or retired. Lost a really good friend this weekend, Brian Augustin.
I saw that.
Died of a stroke this weekend. And it's like, it's just, look, when in 1975, when I came into DC, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was displacing Bob Kanigher and Leo Dorfman and Bob Haney. I was one of the kids coming in and slowly but surely pushing the old guys out. And, I didn't realize that was what was happening until it happened to me.
And, Bob Haney is somebody I started researching. Bob Haney did so much stuff. I mean, I was kind of stunned when I figured out how much stuff he did.
Bob was just crazy prolific, and just like he was great character. He was Chevy Chase's uncle.
Was he really? Where I started, I was reading the old Brave and the Bold, like the old, and then that kind of turned me on to Bob Haney, and I was shocked to find out how much stuff he'd done.
The Batman by Haney and Aparo is my favorite, Silver Age rendition of Batman. I love O'Neill and Adams, but give me the I don't care about continuity Bob Haney stories.
Oh yeah, they were just they're just fun.
Murray Boltinoff and say, the continuity, nobody cares about it. And he was right. But yeah, great guy.
It's been a astounding pleasure to talk with you. Hope maybe I can run into you someday and buy you dinner or something to pay you back for your time. I am going to be, when we finish up, I'm going to Amazon and I'll be ordering that JSA book. I'm quite,
cool.
Yeah, I'm quite interested to check that out.
You can also order my books from me directly, and I sign them.
At paulkupperberg.com, is that the best place to do that?
You can drop me a note at pkupperberg@gmail.com.
Okay.
And
I'll do that then. Because I imagine you have some inventory handy that...
Can't see all the boxes behind that blue chair, but those are short boxes full of books.
I will order from you. So one, so I can get it signed, and two, to help get some of that inventory out of your office. Well, I've got to end. I'm sorry to do this to you, but I have to do it. And I accept no responsibility for any mental damages. But here's the bad joke of the week. All right. And I picked this one out for you since you're such a cool writer. What's the coolest letter in the alphabet?
I don't know, Mr. Bones. What is the coolest letter in the alphabet?
Well, it's B, because it's surrounded by AC.
Oh, that's the fun stuff.
I wish it's a podcast so they can't see it, but I wish they could have seen the look on your face. That was great. Everyone loves the bad joke of the week. It's the joke you love to hate.
The thing. I love bad jokes.
Again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. We barely scratch. I keep saying this, but people need to go research it. But I barely scratched the surface of stuff that you've worked on. So I hope one of these days you get to write some more Conan.
Yeah, me too. Although I can do what I've started doing is just writing pastiches of these guys. Like I had this Superman novel I've been wanting to write forever, and I decided I'm just going to write it, but call the character something different.
Super Guy.
No.
That's
sure.
Sorry, that reminds me, and I know I'm trying to wrap this up. I'm terrible at wrapping things, but you were talking about Wonder Woman and Super Tot or Wonder Tot and Wonder Girl.
Yeah.
I've heard, I don't know if it's true, you probably have insight, that when they did the Teen Titans, it caused a problem because they shoved Wonder Girl in the Teen Titans as a quote-unquote sidekick, and then later they're like, no, that's Wonder Woman when she was younger, so it caused some... They were trying to figure out how to explain that.
I think what happened was Bob forgot. Kanigher was a unique individual. Kanigher was was full of shit. Yeah, he was just a bullshitter, a self-aggrandizer. I loved him. He was a pretentious snob. He wore tweed with the patches on the sleeves. Smoked a pipe and wore aftershave and turtlenecks and
Right.
So and he was a close talker. So he'd get you against the wall in his face and he'd tell you these stories in this nasally voice of his. And he didn't care. He didn't care about that stuff. He just why did I start on Bob?
Because we were talking about Wonder Girl and the Titans.
Oh, right. So he had originally, it would be Queen Hippolyta going, well, here's a story of you when you were a tot. Here's a story of you when you were a girl. And then, after Bob forgot that they were separate, that they were the same character. He probably went, oh, Wonder Girl, Wonder Tot. All together. Wouldn't that be fun? And he wrote that story. And Murray, who also didn't care about continuity, Boltinoff, he just saw, Wonder Girl, there's a teenage character. I'm sure that's, a matter of continuity not mattering.
Right.
That all happened just to screw with John Byrne's head.
20 years. Well, then it led to, so when you try to force everything to fit in continuity, and as a younger reader, I was a continuity. I'm like, it's better fit continuity. But now I'm like, no, just tell me a good story and don't, treat me like a complete idiot. But it leads to all these gymnastics. That's how you come up with all this. Well, Donna Troy and this and that. And we got to, and then it never quite works explaining, because they try too hard to make it fit.
Yeah, there's always going to be gaps. It's ridiculous to try. The insistence on, explaining every inconsistency is just, it's ridiculous. Grown people shouldn't be wasting their time that way.
Yeah, like I said, don't completely treat me like an idiot, but just tell me a good story. Have fun with it.
A good story will hold up regardless of, and I think the Silver Age is proof of it. Everything's a good story because I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and my heroes were doing cool stuff.
Right. Your hero, like I said, it's escapist fantasy entertainment. So that's a great note to end on. Thank you again for your time so much.
You're welcome.
It's been a genuine pleasure, Paul. If you probably don't understand how much it means to people like me to get to spend time talking with folks like you. So
you don't understand that I used to hang out at DC and talk to like Bob Haney and Bob Iger and Julie Schwartz and all these guys, and what you're feeling now, trust me, I know exactly the cycle of fandom.
Well, it's been a treat, so I wish you nothing but the best.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to Shane Plays Geek Talk. I certainly hope you enjoyed this journey into the things we love. For your convenience, show notes with helpful links for each episode can always be found at shaneplays.com. You can catch the podcast in several places, including on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Verbal, YouTube, and more. Shane Plays is also carried on sci-fi.radio. Sci-fi.radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. SCIFI.radio. If you like what you hear and would like to support Shane Plays Geek Talk, you can do so for as little as $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/ShanePlays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay geeky, my friends.